What's up guys, my name is Ace, and one of the most important and fundamental mechanics to understand in Marathon is the heat mechanic, which is effectively your stamina in-game. Although, unlike a lot of games that'll have a stamina bar that will deplete as you perform actions, and then you want to refill it, Marathon just uses the reverse, where it's a bar that will fill up and overheat, and then you'll have to wait for it to cool down before you can perform those actions again. And while on the surface it may seem like a very simple mechanic, there's actually quite a few elements that go into this. And so today I'm going to be diving deep so you fully understand this system, as well as a few tips to help get you around the map more efficiently. And the first big thing I wanted to point out that isn't immediately obvious is each shell will have a different amount of base heat capacity. Although when they call this base heat capacity, this is actually your bonus heat capacity that's tagged on top. And the same goes for your upgrades. So when you upgrade your heat capacity, you're upgrading that bonus heat capacity. And so when upgrading it, it doesn't scale the way you might think. So if you upgrade from 10 to 20 heat capacity, you're not doubling the amount of time that you can sprint for before overheating. But for the shells, by default, Destroyer has 15 heat capacity, Vandal has 25, Recon has 20, Assassin and Triage both have 10, Thief has 15, and then Rook doesn't get any bonus heat capacity whatsoever. Then of course from there, this is where you can upgrade your heat capacity, and this will apply to all of the shells on top of their base values. And this can be upgraded through the Cyberacme skill tree. Also, this can be boosted with implants, for instance, like Distance Runner. That will increase your capacity as well, as long as it's equipped on your character. And so with that established, now let's have a look at some basic timings. And it turns out there isn't just one simple timing here, because there's one key in-game mechanic that will have a big impact on these timings. And this is the amount of water that you are currently exposed to. And this can be achieved through standing in water, or if it's just raining on the map, you will have better cooldown stats on this. And there are 3 different levels to this. Level 1 you'll tend to see in very light rain situations, and it will look like this. So you'll see the little thermometer icon with one little arrow pointing down. Then we have level 2, which is more like moderate rain, or like some puddles that you'll see around the map will also give you this level 2 cooling effect. And then finally we have level 3, which you'll tend to find in very heavy rain and deeper water. So let's have a look at the comparison of our timing here when it comes to how long it takes to overheat just through sprinting. And keep in mind, with this test at the time, my heat capacity value was set to 30 because I was using Assassin, and then I've also upgraded my heat capacity once. So these values will change depending on what your character's heat capacity value is in the moment, but at least for comparison's sake, they were all equal here at 30. Unsurprisingly, when that cooldown effect isn't taking place on the far left, you can see we'll overheat the fastest at 24.4 seconds. Then we have our level 1 effect, which is 26 seconds, our level 2 effect, 27.9 seconds, and then finally the level 3 cooldown effect allows us to sprint for 32.3 seconds before overheating. So that goes to show just how much these effects can help you in that area. However, after that, there's also the heat cooldown delay. So after you stop moving or after you overheat, there's a delay before you start recovering your heat meter. Now, if you don't go all the way to an overheat, by default, this is going to be 2.5 seconds when none of these cooldown effects are taking place. Although this timing can be reduced with the quick vent skill in the Cyberacme skill tree, but by default, it's 2.5 seconds. With a level 1 cooldown, it's 2.25 seconds, level 2 is 2.125, and level 3 will give you a base 2-second delay. However, that's if you don't go all the way up to an overheat. From what I've measured, if you go all the way up to an overheat, basically just tag on roughly 600 milliseconds on top of that, or 0.6 seconds. That's how much additional time it takes to start the cooldown process, and it's the punishment for going all the way up to an overheat rather than getting right up close to it, but then stopping and letting yourself recover first. And that's obviously a pretty standard mechanic in video games, but just know you're best off not going all the way up to an overheat, because once you do hit that overheat, it's going to take longer to recover, and you won't be able to sprint or slide until you've fully recovered from that. And speaking of that recovery, let's get into the next timings here. It turns out this water effect will also have an impact on your cooldown rate. And again, this is another stat that can be upgraded in the Cyberacme skill tree. And as you can see on the far right, with a level 3 cooldown effect, it takes 5.1 seconds to fully recover once the recovery has started. With level 2, 6.3 seconds, level 1, 6.9 seconds, and then finally, if there's no cooldown effect, it'll take a total of 7.8 seconds. And so looking at all of these values so far, this goes to show just how much of an effect that water can have on your heat, or your effectiveness moving around the map. And therefore, whenever tactically viable at least, it's often in your best interest to make sure you're traveling through water, or at least getting to a body of water in order to recover your stamina before moving on. Now, of course, that's only when tactically viable. You don't want to be putting yourself way out of position, way out of cover if you know there are enemies nearby, for instance. But water is an important element that really does interact with the gameplay, especially when considering map traversal. And then on top of that, rain is your friend in this game when it comes to traversing the map. It's a good thing to be experiencing a raining event. Now, speaking of heat recovery, I wanted to talk about a tooltip they've shared multiple times officially. It's actually in the game as a tooltip, and this has caused a little bit of confusion, and this is crouching will apparently improve your heat recovery rate. And so early on, this is what I would do. I would sprint for a while, try to sprint to a nice piece of cover, and then I would just stand still and crouch, expecting that I'd be recovering my heat faster than if I were to just stand still without crouching. However, now that I've done the testing on this, it turns out standing still and crouching has zero benefit compared to just standing still on its own. So in that way, crouching doesn't help with your heat recovery at all. However, where it does help is if you're still on the move while crouching. So comparing crouch walking to standing and walking, so not sprinting, but just walking forward while standing. In that case, if you're walking forward and standing while trying to recover your heat, you will still recover, but at a slower rate. And based on my testing, this is a roughly 30% slower rate of recovery when standing and walking forward, whereas when crouching and moving forward, there's no additional penalty here whatsoever. So you'll recover just as fast as if you were standing still or crouching still. So as long as you still plan on being on the move, crouching is definitely your best bet for heat recovery. And therefore, the most effective method for getting across the map, for instance, traveling long distances, is going to be first paying attention to the water status and trying to get that water meter up as high as possible. Second, sprint almost right up to the point where you've overheated, but don't fully overheat. And then once you get to that point, crouch, and then crouch walk in the direction you're planning on going until you recover fully, and then you get back to sprinting, and you just repeat that process over and over again. And then, of course, ideally, you want to have your knife out. And this is where we get into the next section, which is, does the weapon in your hand matter when it comes to your heat buildup times or your heat recovery times? And the simple answer is no. It doesn't matter if you're using an LMG or a knife or a pistol in your hand. You will be able to sprint for the same amount of time before overheating. In saying that, though, there are different movement speeds attached to various weapons, and this is based on their weight value in the game. And so while you can sprint for the same amount of time with an LMG versus an SMG, you will be able to cover a longer distance in that amount of time with the faster moving weapon. And the fastest moving weapon, to my knowledge at least, is the knife. So that's the additional tip. If you're trying to cover a very long distance in the shortest amount of time, make sure you've got your knife out. Now, so far, we've just been looking at sprinting and how that builds up heat. What other actions will build up heat? Well, the first one I've mentioned several times here as well is sliding. This will generate a big burst of heat. And by default, with a standard slide, this will generate roughly 25 heat based on their scale of heat. It's a little difficult to hand test and measure that. But essentially what I'm saying here is you can get about 4 slides off before overheating unless you've heavily upgraded your heat capacity. However, Vandal has the super slide mechanic, and this one allows you to slide longer distances, but it generates more heat. And based on my testing here, this is roughly 33 to 35 heat, meaning you'll now only get about 3 slides in before overheating. Again, unless you've heavily upgraded. Also with Vandal, her other trait is microjets, which gives you a double jump. And that additional jump that you get with that generates quite a bit of heat as well. It's about 40 heat, so you'll overheat very quickly if you're double jumping far too much. Although another factor to consider with Vandal is her prime ability, Amplify, will massively reduce the amount of heat buildup that you'll see while it's active. And this appears to cut the amount of heat generated from all of your actions in half, or at least roughly in half. So you can do a whole lot more while Vandal's ultimate is active. Then for another shell to consider here, this is Destroyer. Destroyer has a couple traits that interact with heat as well. The first one is Tactical Sprint, so basically a double sprint mechanic. This one allows you to move roughly 22.5% faster. However, it builds up heat significantly faster as well. In fact, with my testing in this tactical sprint, it took only 10 seconds to overheat my character. So using this ability is a killer on your heat meter. And then the other ability that Destroyer has is that thruster ability. It's kind of like a dash. It allows you to thrust forward. And this takes up roughly 55% of your heat meter by default. So that's another massive heat generator that you have to consider if using this character and their traits. And one last little thing to tag on here, if you swing your knife, this will generate a very small amount of heat as well. And this just leaves us with one last section here, and this is just looking at elements that can improve your heat capacity outside of the upgrades that I've mentioned through Cyber Acme. And the first one I've noticed, which I also mentioned, is Distance Runner as an implant. This implant will increase your heat capacity as long as it's equipped to your character. And then on top of that, the Cardio Kit consumable, as long as it's not the depleted ones, this one can also increase your heat capacity as well as your agility. for its active duration. So if you are planning on traveling a long distance, or if maybe you know you're about to get into a fight and you want as much heat available as possible, it's great to activate these. And there we have it. That's finally going to wrap it up for all of the testing results that I've found with the heat mechanic or stamina in Marathon. And there's really a lot more that goes into this than I initially expected. And with that, I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, did you guys learn anything that you didn't already know about the heat mechanic in Marathon? And second, how do you feel about how heat is currently balanced in this game? Do you guys think it's balanced very appropriately, or maybe not so much? If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.